He was hailed as the Western counterpart of Qin Shi Huang and Emperor Wu of Han, and in the eyes of his enemies, he was a ruthless butcher, though he never declared himself emperor in his lifetime. Every emperor after him saw him as a role model. This legendary man was Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar was born into a prestigious family. His father was a praetor of the Roman Empire. His uncle by marriage was a consul. He came from a powerful and noble lineage. As a member of a noble household, Caesar should have had a bright and promising future. However, when he was just 18 years old, the famed Roman general Sulla defeated Marius in a civil war and entered Rome under the pretext of protecting the capital. Thus, Sulla became the de facto ruler of the Roman Empire. He then used his army to intimidate the Senate and issued his infamous declaration of proscription: "I will show no mercy to my enemies and will deal with them in the most brutal ways." From then on, public announcements were posted daily across the city of Rome. Anyone named on the list would be stripped of citizenship. Those who captured them would be granted official positions. Informants would be rewarded, and anyone hiding them would be punished as accomplices. Fear and panic swept through the city. To the citizens of Rome, this was unbearable. Caesar stepped forward to read the list and was shocked to find his father-in-law's name among them. He immediately grabbed his daughter and rushed to his father-in-law's house to warn him to flee, only to find that soldiers had already begun their raids. When he arrived, he discovered two informants already watching the house. Caesar quickly urged his father-in-law to escape first and stayed behind to stall the informants. As he fought with the two men, a large group of Sulla's soldiers suddenly arrived. One of the informants reported to the officer that Caesar had helped his father-in-law escape, and the general on horseback was none other than Pompey, one of Rome's first triumvirate. This was Pompey's first time meeting Caesar, and so Caesar was arrested and thrown into prison. Inside the prison, groups of prisoners were continuously taken out and executed. This left Caesar in utter despair. It was this very experience that sparked Caesar's deep desire for power in the years to come. Soon after, he was brought before Sulla by the soldiers. It turned out that Caesar's mother had pleaded with Sulla, begging him to spare her son's life. Sulla had always admired this talented young man, so he gave Caesar two choices: either marry his daughter and become his subordinate, or be sent straight to the afterlife. Caesar sternly refused this unreasonable demand. He would never bow to the enemies of his family, nor would he betray his wife, Cornelia. Sulla flew into a rage and immediately ordered Caesar to be executed on the spot. At this critical moment, Pompey stepped forward. He told Sulla that Caesar posed no real threat, and that the priority should be capturing those who were still at large. Sulla found this reasoning sound and, surprisingly, released Caesar on the spot. But Caesar's instincts told him it couldn't possibly be that simple. Just as he left the palace and hadn't gone far, he was suddenly stopped by a man on horseback. As the figure drew near, Caesar realized it was General Pompey. Caesar thought Pompey had come to finish him off personally, and just as he summoned his courage to fight him, Pompey suddenly said he sees great potential in Caesar and doesn't want him to ruin his future at such a young age. He suggested Caesar go east to Bithynia to lay low for a while. Before Caesar departed, Pompey gave him a ring and told him, "When the king of Bithynia sees this ring, he'll take care of you." Caesar couldn't understand why Pompey would help him, but he didn't think too much about it and took the ring, quickly boarding a ship to leave Rome. But he never expected that shortly after setting sail, his ship would be intercepted by a group of pirates. Caesar was tied up and thrown into the sea, told that if he wanted to live, he'd have to pay a ransom. The pirates didn't know Caesar was of noble birth, and they set his ransom at just 2 talents. Even Caesar himself felt that this price was an insult to his reputation, so he boldly offered to increase his own ransom. The pirates were confused, never having met someone who thought his ransom was too low, but they gladly agreed. The pirates then let Caesar's companions return to Rome to collect the money, leaving Caesar alone as their hostage. Days passed, but his companions didn't return. The pirates began to suspect that Caesar had tricked them, and decided to execute him on the spot. Wanting to die with dignity, Caesar requested a duel with the pirate leader. This piqued the pirates' interest. They agreed, and the fight began. Though starving for days, Caesar relied on the skills he had trained since childhood, and within a few moves, he had knocked the leader to the ground. But then, Caesar suddenly had a seizure and collapsed. Thinking no one was coming to pay the ransom, the pirate leader ordered his men to throw Caesar into the sea to feed the fish. Just then, a ship appeared in the distance. Caesar's companions had finally returned with the ransom. After receiving the payment, the pirates kept their word and released Caesar. And so, Caesar once again embarked on the road of exile. 8 years flew by. One day, while passing through a small town, Caesar heard a piece of shocking news: Sulla had unexpectedly died just a few days earlier. With his enemy gone, there was no need for him to continue living a life on the run. Caesar immediately decided to return to Rome. Upon arriving home, he discovered that his wife had fallen ill. Since Caesar's departure, Cornelia had missed him so deeply that her sorrow turned into sickness, and not long after, she passed away. Staring at her lifeless body, Caesar was filled with grief and rage. If he had been powerful enough, none of this would have happened. At this point, because of his bold defiance against Sulla, Caesar had gained a certain level of popularity in Rome. Standing before his wife's body, he swore an oath: "Never again will a dictator like Sulla rule over Rome. I will make sure that Rome's power belongs to the Roman people." His impassioned speech won thunderous applause from everyone present. Watching from a distance, Pompey took notice of this moment and ordered his men to keep a close eye on Caesar. Meanwhile, Caesar began secretly building his own power using his family's influence. He was generous with his spending, investing large sums of money to strengthen ties with the Roman nobility. Soon, his political influence began to rise steadily. With the Senate's backing, Caesar was appointed as Rome's financial officer, but this was only the first step. What Caesar truly desired was supreme power in Rome. At that time, the sea route supplying grain from Egypt to Rome had been cut off by pirates. This led to severe food shortages, causing prices in the city to skyrocket and plunging the citizens into fear and unrest. The Senate convened an emergency meeting to address the crisis, and the senators unanimously agreed that a military crackdown was necessary. But the question remained: who should lead the campaign? Debate quickly erupted. Some supported sending Pompey, while others strongly opposed it. Because Pompey already wielded immense power, many feared he could become the next Sulla. They desperately needed a new general who could suppress the pirates and also serve as a counterbalance to Pompey. As the debate grew increasingly heated, Caesar suddenly stepped forward and, in front of all the senators, nominated Pompey for the mission. This move was Caesar's way of extending an olive branch to Pompey. Impressed by Caesar's goodwill, Pompey lowered his guard, and the two formed an alliance. With Caesar now on his side, Pompey felt reassured and set out on a long expedition across the seas. After years of intense naval warfare, he completely eradicated the pirate threat. When Pompey returned to Rome riding his triumphal chariot like a king, the citizens lined the streets in celebration. Caesar watched everything in silence, deeply moved. He realized that if he truly wanted power, winning the hearts of the people was not enough. He needed glorious military achievements. While everyone else was celebrating Pompey's victorious return, Caesar suddenly collapsed from a seizure. His mother rushed to take him home. After regaining consciousness, Caesar shared his desire to lead an army. His mother replied, "If you want a military command, your only option now is to borrow troops from Pompey. But will he lend them to you?" Caesar had no clear answer. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation had been overheard by Caesar's daughter, who was now a grown young woman. That night, Caesar's daughter came to him and told him she wanted to marry Pompey. Caesar asked in confusion, "Do you truly love him?" His daughter firmly expressed her feelings, but what Caesar didn't know was that Julia's true reason for doing this was for her father's sake. She knew her father had great ambitions, and if things continued as they were, he would one day become equal in power to Pompey. If she married Pompey, on one hand, it would make it easier for her father to borrow troops, and on the other hand, if Caesar and Pompey ever clashed in the future, she might be able to restrain Pompey to some extent. Seeing her unwavering determination, Caesar could only reluctantly agree to the marriage. And so, Julia and Pompey were wed, and Caesar became Pompey's father-in-law. Now that the old father-in-law was asking for troops, Pompey had no reason to refuse. Thus, Caesar gained his own army, and his first goal was to march north and conquer Gaul. In 58 BC, Caesar was appointed governor of Gaul and led over 20,000 troops across the Roman border, launching an invasion into Gaul. Gaul lay in the northwest of the Roman Empire, encompassing large parts of modern-day France, Germany, and the Netherlands. Since the early days of the Roman Empire, the Gauls had frequently invaded the south, so every Roman harbored deep hatred toward them. If Caesar could defeat the Gauls in this campaign, he would not only gain the support of the Roman people but also increase his influence in military matters. To win the war, Caesar adopted a strategy of sustaining the army through conquest. Gaul was made up of many different tribes, each with their own agenda and lacking unity. As a result, the Roman army gradually chipped away at Gaul's territory. After 2 years of hard fighting, Caesar had already conquered most of Gaul. News of his victory reached Rome, and fearing Caesar's growing power might become uncontrollable, the Senate requested Pompey to order Caesar to withdraw and return to Rome. But Pompey refused. believing that Caesar was still under his control. Back on the battlefield, Caesar had already begun his campaigns into Germania and Britannia. At this point, his army was unstoppable, winning every battle. His dazzling military success attracted many followers, including a young nobleman named Mark Antony. Antony had studied military strategy from a young age and had remarkable talent on the battlefield. His arrival gave Caesar even greater strength, and he became one of Caesar's most loyal supporters. In 53 BC, after conquering most of Gaul, the Roman army prepared for one final push to take the last territory, Gergovia. But as they passed through a forest, they were suddenly ambushed by the Gauls. The Roman army suffered heavy losses, and the commander on the other side was Vercingetorix, a famous Gallic general and one of the greatest enemies Caesar would ever face. News of the crushing defeat reached headquarters, and Caesar was shocked. This was the worst loss Rome had suffered since the campaign into Gaul began. Determined to end it himself, Caesar personally led his forces to surround the city of Alesia, where Vercingetorix was based. Vercingetorix was prepared to defend the city to the death, and Caesar, instead of launching a reckless attack, chose to lay siege, aiming to cut off supplies and starve the enemy into surrender. After months of siege, the city ran out of food. To conserve supplies, Vercingetorix drove all the elderly, women, and children out of the city. Their fate was tragic, all of them starved to death outside the walls. Meanwhile, Caesar's own army began facing food shortages, and conflicts among the soldiers in the camp started to intensify. Caesar realized that if he didn't defeat Vercingetorix before the Gallic reinforcements arrived, they would be surrounded and crushed from both sides. But the Gallic reinforcements arrived anyway. At that moment, Caesar's Roman army had only 50,000 men, and facing attacks from both front and rear, victory was far from certain. Yet Caesar didn't panic. Instead, he calmly devised a strategy. He ordered his elite troops to hold the left flank of the camp at all costs. If that side fell, the main force would be completely encircled. Meanwhile, he continued to face off with Vercingetorix. A great battle was imminent. With the deafening sound of war horns, the Gallic reinforcements surged toward the Roman army like a tidal wave. Although the Roman fortifications blocked some of the attackers, the Gauls pressed on with fierce determination and relentless assault. The Roman side didn't back down either, launching massive destructive weapons in retaliation, but the enemies seemed to have gone mad. Rushing in wave after wave, replacing each fallen warrior with another, they split into two groups. One erected ladders to scale the fortress, while the other used battering rams to smash the outer walls. Every Roman soldier fought with bravery, but the Gauls had superior numbers and high morale. Eventually, they breached the outer walls and poured inside like a flood. The Romans were pushed back again and again, and what had seemed like a favorable battle now turned desperate. Meanwhile, Caesar was still laying siege to Vercingetorix, determined to prevent him from linking up with the reinforcements. But to Caesar's surprise, Vercingetorix launched an attack from within the city. At the same time, the Gallic reinforcements had broken through the Roman defenses. Caesar had no choice but to personally lead reinforcements to patch the gap in the outer wall. But the situation on the battlefield kept deteriorating. The outer defense line had nearly collapsed. Caesar knew defense alone wouldn't win the day, so he made a swift decision to go on the offensive. He sent an elite unit to strike the Gallic reinforcements from behind, launching a surprise flanking maneuver. As the cavalry charged from the rear, panic spread through the Gallic ranks. Due to the poor communication technology of the time, confusion in one part of the battlefield quickly led to collapse in others. The disoriented Gallic forces had no choice but to retreat. Once again, Caesar demonstrated his extraordinary military genius. After this battle, the Gauls were no longer capable of mounting any effective resistance. Vercingetorix, trapped inside the city, chose to surrender. He was the most renowned general of Gaul, yet in front of Caesar, he had no choice but to admit defeat. He walked alone into the enemy camp, hoping to plead for the lives of the civilians inside the city. Caesar looked at him coldly, saying nothing. A defeated general has no right to speak of bravery. Vercingetorix removed his armor and knelt at Caesar's feet, once again making a sincere plea. A proud warrior, willing to sacrifice his name and dignity to protect the innocent. It was a heartbreaking sight. Even the Roman officers present were moved by the moment. Caesar turned and returned to his camp without a word. Upon returning, he received devastating news from Rome. His daughter Julia had died in childbirth. This meant that his alliance with Pompey had lost its foundation, and the two men were destined to face off in the near future. Meanwhile, in a Senate meeting in Rome, Caesar's decision to spare the enemy was twisted. The civilians in the city were branded as traitors. In truth, the Senate feared Caesar might become the next Sulla, and they secretly plotted with Pompey to take Caesar down together. After 8 years of foreign conquest, Caesar was now being accused of treason, a deep insult he could not ignore. But Caesar was no longer the man he once was. Years of warfare had earned him enormous prestige among the Roman people, and his army had grown from 3 legions to 10. He now had the power to challenge any force in Rome.
I've made my decision. I'm going to Rome. I'm going to cross the Rubicon. Will anyone be coming with me? To Rome!
He decided to lead his legions toward the capital. On the way, Pompey received word that Caesar had crossed the Rubicon. His army was now just a short distance from Rome. Lacking the military strength to oppose Caesar's 10 legions, Pompey feared what Caesar might do once he returned. So he chose to flee Rome and head to Greece to raise a new army and plot his counterattack. And so in 49 BC, Caesar led his legions into Rome, his reputation now unmatched. The people of Rome lined the streets in welcome as he paraded through the city with the Gallic general Vercingetorix in chains. Amid thunderous cheers, Caesar stepped into the center of the Senate Assembly Hall. Faced with Caesar's overwhelming power and sky-high popularity among the people, the Senate had no choice but to compromise. Granting him the title of consul,
is given the courts and elected consul for life. Hail Caesar!
A few days later, Caesar marched into the Senate with his army, and sensing the shift in power, the senators quickly changed their tone. Caesar then announced in front of everyone that his men would now join the Senate. The senators were stunned. Military commanders were strictly forbidden from interfering in politics. One of them stood up and declared that this move violated Roman law, but Caesar responded forcefully, "The law is changed. You will be joined by my finest men." Next, Caesar set out to chase down the fleeing Pompey. He pursued him all the way to Pharsalus, where the two sides clashed in what became known as the Battle of Pharsalus. Defeated, Pompey fled to Egypt. Having once helped King Ptolemy XII, Pompey sought refuge with his successor, King Ptolemy XIII. But the young Egyptian king, knowing that Pompey had lost everything and not wanting to offend Caesar, made a fateful decision. Thus, the once mighty Roman triumvirate, Pompey, met his end in Egypt. To eliminate all threats, Caesar continued his pursuit into Egypt. When he arrived at the royal palace, Ptolemy XIII presented him with Pompey's severed head. Thinking this would win Caesar's favor, the king was shocked when Caesar exploded in fury. Though Pompey had been his rival, he was also his son-in-law. It was Caesar's right to deal with him, not some outsiders. As Caesar wrestled with how to respond, a mysterious woman dressed in black appeared before him. She was none other than Cleopatra, the famed queen of Egypt. She came to Caesar in the dead of night, asking for his help in reclaiming the Egyptian throne, promising in return to send Rome annual tributes of gold and silver. Caesar looked at her in silence, offering no reply. Seeing she couldn't persuade him with words, Cleopatra offered something no Egyptian man could refuse herself. Even someone as strong-willed as Caesar couldn't resist such temptation. Years later, Caesar led his forces south and fought the Egyptians in the Battle of Alexandria. During the battle, King Ptolemy XIII was killed, and Caesar successfully conquered Egypt, placing Cleopatra on the throne. From that point on, Egypt became part of Rome's sphere of influence. Caesar had now reached the peak of his power. Upon returning triumphantly to Rome, his string of victories had elevated his prestige to unimaginable heights. Some even placed a crown on his statue. Cleopatra also appeared by Caesar's side, and most notably, so did their child. When the senators saw the child, they were stunned. The image of the crowned statue and the child in his arms led many to believe that Caesar intended to abolish the republic and establish an autocratic monarchy. Their own positions and survival were now at risk, so they began plotting Caesar's assassination. Marcus Brutus hid a dagger in his home, but his wife, Portia, accidentally discovered it. Confused by her husband's behavior, she secretly followed him and overheard a shocking conspiracy. She couldn't believe that her own husband was colluding with the senators to assassinate Caesar. Being naturally timid, she didn't know what to do. The next day, Marcus Brutus requested a meeting with Caesar at the Senate, claiming there was an important matter to discuss. Shortly after Caesar left for the Senate, Portia revealed the conspiracy to Caesar's mistress, Calpurnia. Her husband and the senators were plotting to kill him. Meanwhile, Caesar had already arrived at the Senate, where the senators greeted him as usual. During the session, everything seemed normal, and Caesar noticed nothing out of the ordinary. But slowly, the senators began to close in around him. Suddenly, they attacked. Surrounded and outnumbered, Caesar fell into a pool of his own blood. What he never expected was that one of the conspirators was Marcus Brutus. Marcus Brutus, the child of Caesar's mistress, had always been treated by Caesar as his own son, and yet, it was this very person who struck the fatal blow. Looking up at the statue of his old rival Pompey, perhaps in that final moment, Caesar understood how truly lonely they both were, how fate had dealt them such eerily similar hands. By the time Calpurnia arrived at the Senate, Caesar lay on the floor, barely clinging to life. And so, the legendary life of Emperor Caesar came to an end in 44 BC. At the age of 56, though his life was short, Caesar's extraordinary brilliance and military genius not only conquered the Mediterranean, but also won the admiration of countless emperors throughout history. The laws he enacted and the legacy he left behind continue to shape the world to this day.